What's going on, everybody? So I thought it might be a good idea to kind of preface what it is we're doing here and why we're doing it. I was hit up by Paul Blamier. He's a e-liquid manufacturer, and he also formulates recipes for other e-liquid companies. You've probably tried something that he's had a hand in, even if you don't know it. And we spoke about what was going on in South Australia. I had heard a little bit about it, but honestly, I didn't know exactly what had happened. After speaking with him for about an hour, I was blown away by the scope and the scale of what had happened in South Australia. It's beyond devastating. It's worst case scenario kind of stuff. Shortly after I spoke with him, Sam came home from his trip, and the first video that he made was addressing the situation in his home, because that's where this happened, is in South Australia, where Sam lives. After watching that video, I was very motivated to do something to bring awareness to this. If you haven't seen the video, I'll link it at the bottom. I would appreciate it if you go watch that first, because it's a good preemption to what we're going to talk about. Sam and I were friends. We talked, so I hit him up right after I watched the video, and as I assumed, his response was, "Yeah, fuck it, let's do it. You know, let's do whatever. Let's do whatever." He just wanted to make sure that people understood what exactly had happened and the ramifications down the road for what could happen. Shortly after that, we decided, yeah, we're gonna do something. Let's put together a live. We'll do a panel. We'll just have people, talk about what's going on. The first person that I thought of was Matt Cully. It's kind of a no-brainer for me. I think Matt's one of the most intelligent guys in the industry. He's also very even keel and explains things in a way that are very easy to understand. And he's the kind of guy that you can learn from, and that I learn from. So I hit him up, and his response was not surprising either. It was the same as Sam's. Yeah, let's do it. Let's rock and roll. Let's make it happen. So fast forward a week or so, and we all got together, and this is what we did. We decided, instead of doing a live, which can have its own set of issues, that we would record our discussion and just keep it casual, talk like we would talk if we were just sitting at a bar somewhere. And at the end, I would edit it and present it to you guys, and that's what we've done. So I really hope that you all enjoy it, hopefully learn something, and take the information and use it to do what you can to make sure that something like what happened there does not happen here or wherever it is you live. Thank you for your time.
So I'm kind of hazy on how. So you guys have, obviously, South Australia is its own. You guys have states, basically, right?
Yeah, you got state governments and federal governments.
Okay, and how many states do you got in Australia?
Well, you got 7 states and territories. States and territories are slightly different in the way that they work, but they're basically the same sort of thing. You've got South Australia, which is a state, Victoria, which is a state, New South Wales is a state, Queensland is a state, and Western Australia is a state. And then you've got 2 territories, the Australian Capital Territory and the
Northern Territory.
Okay.
And then you've also got Tasmania, but Tasmania is its own entity.
Yeah, I was talking to Paul about this the other day, and I was kind of under the impression that Australia as a whole is a lot more like California, say, than a lot of the other parts of the United States. It's a very kind of liberal.
Yeah, a little bit. I would, Australian politics is much more like the UK than, because you guys have a republic. We have obviously a parliament.
Parliament.
Yeah, 2 houses. the president is elected, whereas in Australia you still elect a party, and then they have their prime minister, and they can change that prime minister anytime they like over the 4 years of the term of the government.
When you talk liberals and conservatives in other countries, it's a little different from ours.
Yeah,
it's not
it's
like
totally different.
It's not like liberals are like the Dem type of party and the conservatives are the Republican type of party. Just
Liberals
like our parties have
stand
switched. Like Democrats used to be more conservative.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the party split in the '60s.
Yeah, but see, traditionally liberals were very much free enterprise, run your own business.
Okay, so
do what you want.
Well, that's what we would call classical liberals.
Yeah.
Which is more of a libertarian now.
Exactly. Exactly.
Liberal government actually bringing in stuff that instead of making it better for businesses and more freedom and more about, capitalism, they're actually making it, harder, more conservative, which is not in line with traditionally what they used to do. So it's pretty messed up.
Okay, to break it down a little bit further, the last 5 years since the Liberal government's been in power, they're more what we classify as neoliberal. Or ultra right wing.
Yeah.
Politics gets confusing because, like, in the States, people would be like, well, that's a conservative, but it's actually neoliberalism. Like, Ronald Reagan was the first big neoliberal in the U.S.
Yep, big time.
People think liberal because they put it into terms of what liberal means now, but neoliberal is a whole different ballgame. It's corporatism.
Yeah. And people don't really actually know what's what. At the end of the day, what's happening in both countries is the big businesses that are funding these corporations are dictating what the policies are.
Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely.
Because it doesn't really matter what the doctrine of the Liberal Party or the doctrine of the Labor Party sort of stands for. It's about who's fucking paying them, and if a big corporation says we're going to give you all this money to make sure these policies are in favor of us, well, they're going to go away from their traditional stances because of the fucking money.
It's not about ideology. It's about dollar signs.
Exactly. Yeah. The other ideology's gone. It's now just about, okay, who's greasing our fucking palms here?
Once money gets involved and there's greed, people easily move their ideology around depending on how it fits. Yeah,
it gets pretty blurry and very confusing.
Whereas the Australian government, they're hooked on that tobacco cash.
Absolutely.
It's not only the tobacco cash, Sam. It's also pharma.
It goes. That's what I mean. Like the tobacco cash is enough for the government just to want to keep cigarettes going. But then if you add the big pharmaceuticals in there, you've got the TGA, you've got places like the Heart Foundation, the Cancer Council, which are paying, are getting money from these groups they want to remain the top. If you're Nicorette, if you're Nicobape, these two big brands in Australia that make all the patches and the gums, you're scared as shit about vaping, and you're giving as much money as you can to these various organizations and government bodies to make vaping, harder, because that way people have only got patches and gums to go to.
The TGA wants to classify vaping if they ever get their hands on it and they start bringing forward regulations. They'd like to see it as an ends product or an electronic nicotine delivery system or a type of CSAID, and then they can bring it under the pharma banner. But right now, the way that the government is looking at it, they're not looking at the real science, they're looking at pseudoscience or outdated studies that are not being listened to, not being read. They won't even, for argument's sake, they will not even look at what was put out there by the Royal College. They'd rather look at a study that was put out in 2014 and then again in 2016 by the WHO and go along those lines. Everyone knows that those studies were flawed. Everyone knows that they were debunked. They will not even listen to the letters. And I mean, when I say letters, I say big piles of documentation that even Dr. Farsalinas has sent across. You sent me across.
You got a letter from. You got a response letter that was basically citing a study from 2012,
2014, and 2012. And
I mean, good Lord.
And they classify nicotine here in Australia as a Schedule 7 drug. In the same category, here our classifications are a little bit different. It's classified in under the Poisons Directive, but Schedule 7 also puts heroin in the same category as nicotine.
Sounds pretty science-based.
Right?
Oh, really?
I mean,
we
that's the
won't.
thing. Is like just because they're both very addictive does not mean that they create the as much harm.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
The end result of smoking 100 cigarettes is not the same end result as
If
shooting
I
a
have half a
fucking dope
gram
in
of-
your arm.
Because you guys have socialized medicine there, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I
you
mean,
break
it's
your leg.
odd that you would think that they would be for it. Because I mean, that's my opinion is that the UK is 100%
Oh, yeah.
only for
Oh,
vaping
yeah.
because it saves them money.
Yeah.
Let me
Right,
explain why they haven't done that. Because you would think, you go, all right, if we have a public health system that costs us a lot of money when people get sick from things like cancer, right? You know, the government, the cigarette taxes are so high in Australia, they make so much.
No, depending on the state. New South Wales, it's 41.
Yeah, it's higher, right? So
Wow.
what they do is they make all of this money from cigarette tax, and that far exceeds the cost of the actual public health system's, you know, cancer-related disease or cigarette-related.
So they're just doing this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you make
Just
if you
going,
make,
well, okay,
you make more off the disease than
it
you do off
costs
the
us
cure.
100. Well, it costs us $326 million a year in smoking-related illnesses to our public health system. But we make this many billion in cigarette-related taxes, so we can pay for all that cancer treatment and still be out in front by a few billion.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's the problem with sin taxes is that the governments get hooked on the taxes. And,
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Like people get hooked on cigarettes.
I mean, we have that problem with the master settlement agreement
The master settlement agreement. Yeah.
here in the
Right.
states. Like some of these states would just be absolutely screwed if that money goes away. Already tried to regulate vaping once as a drug, as a medicinal drug, as a cessation drug, and so that it's like we could definitely kind of go that route, but if we don't treat it as more of like a recreational thing, then they'll say, okay, well, we're just going to throw it in the pharmacies then, and you're
Well, the other thing is that they want the vaping technology now, especially the how would you put it? More of the temperature control as a drug delivery system and pod systems, especially for certain things that they've got in their playbook.
Yeah, I think there's a promising future for vaporizing certain kinds of drugs when it comes to needing like, as opposed to like a pill that maybe takes 30, 40 minutes, like maybe you get your
Quick.
Like say somebody takes pain meds, they take a puff off of a vaporizer of whatever drug it is to get the instant relief, and then they take the extended relief pill or something like that. But it would have that part definitely should be heavily regulated because
Well, you start putting like, fucking kind of benzos or any sort of opiates into a vaporizer. Yeah, you want that heavily regulated.
Yeah.
We've seen what just throwing out pills does in
it'll
the
only be able to give off like one puff a day. Like
Right. It's got to have some sort of chip in there to make sure that people aren't going crazy with it. Or
OxyContin was supposed to be some thing that was created to keep people from becoming addicted.
A whole new epidemic.
It became the biggest fucking epidemic that there is, and that's an actual epidemic.
There's an epidemic spreading. It can release dangerous chemicals.
When I started vaping back in 2014, I couldn't find what I wanted, like flavor-wise. So I got into the DIY side of things. I had to learn then how to mix my own liquid, how to add my own nicotine, and how to make it taste good. Now,
Born of necessity. That's a huge roadblock down there. Is the fact that just to be a vapor, all of a sudden you got to be a fucking Breaking Bad chemist and be handling nicotine and fucking syringes and goddamn measuring cups. It's like, I don't know. That's a little rough, man. That'd be, I don't know if I would be willing to do that shit when I started vaping 5 or 6 years ago.
Even in the UK with the short fills, it's a pain in the ass getting.
Yeah, and it's just a little tip.
Dude,
it's just a little tip, and then you shake it up.
Right now, I would say if the government said, all right, we're not going to allow you to put pre-mixed juice with nicotine, but you can have the UK system of short fills, I would take that because a
Oh,
short
yeah.
fill is so much easier. You unscrew the top, you unscrew your nicotine bottle, you dump it in, job done. Nicotine, I've got to measure it out, put the nicotine in. I then got to get VGPG, and I've got to top up my bottle. It's a fucking pain in the ass.
Right. And I tried it, man. I tried it real fucking hard, man. I was like, yeah, I'll DIY, bro. I got this shit, man. I can cook. Fuck this. I can do this. And bro, like 3 juices in, and I was like, fuck, man, I'm gonna go get some Time Bomb or something, bro. I can't do it. It's fucking, I can't do it.
Annoying. It's annoying.
So,
like, yeah, and you get people that put too much nicotine in their juice, and then it's over-nicked, and they're like, oh, it's harsh, it's burning my throat.
Right.
You've got people that put their nicotine in, and then they forget to shake the bottle, and so their first drip on their RDA, like 80 milligrams.
Oh, fuck.
And it also, it creates an even more dangerous situation, because instead of having someone with a bottle of juice sitting in their coffee table that's got 3 milligrams in it and a child safety lock, right? And if the child does drink that bottle of 3 milligram, they're not dead. They're feeling sick, but they're not dead, right? You got 100 milligrams sitting in the fucking freezer. Some kid decides to have a fucking swig of that, and suddenly you're looking at life and death. You know, it's dangerous.
Yeah, no, it's
forcing people.
It's a dangerous chemical.
Poison sitting in their freezer.
Yeah. And that's one of the biggest things. That's one of the biggest things that we were talking to when we were at the Prop East stuff in San Francisco was, you're talking about kids, but in order for people to remain off cigarettes and try and maintain that healthy lifestyle, they're going to have a product in their house that is far more detrimental to a child than a vape is to a teenager. I'd like to know a little bit more about how it turned. You know what I mean? Because it was just kind of like, oh, well, this old government got in trouble, and then this new guys came, and now we're fucked. Like, why wasn't there something involved in between there? You know what I mean?
It's pretty simple, and it's like any ministers instead of, senators. Like, you guys would have senators in charge of stuff. We've got senators as well, where you have ministers with portfolios. And so you had a minister for health and a minister for education, and sometimes they've got majority of portfolios that they look after. So they decided we need to regulate South Australia because there's no regulation on e-cigarettes currently. But until this legislation comes in, if you were to vape on a bus or in a school, technically there's no legislation that would allow the government to fine you.
There was just nothing on the books whatsoever.
No, exactly. So you're not smoking a cigarette, so they can't apply smoking legislation if you smoked on a bus. Obviously, instant fine. And if you smoke on a plane, instant fine. And if you smoked in a school, again, instant fine. But there's no regulation on e-cigarettes. So they're like, we need to bring in something. And hey, we're all for bringing in, no vaping on school ground, and no vaping on trains and buses. Obviously,
like you
not
said,
selling to under 18.
You guys actually hired a lobbyist or a lobbying firm to actually go in there and do some ass kicking?
Yeah, so before we get to that point, the government realized we need to regulate. So, they've gone in and they've set up this select committee, which is going to investigate e-cigarettes and work out what they are and how we should regulate them. And they came back with these findings, blah, 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 and the usual bullshit. Oh, kids are going to re-normalize smoking and all of that sort of crap. And they basically said, all right, well, what if we put vaping in with the tobacco legislation? And that way, all the stuff that applies to cigarettes will apply to vaping, job done.
Yeah.
And obviously that's going to be terrible for the industry. So a lot of shops, a lot of retailers online, juice makers, basically a huge chunk of the industry said we need to get this fixed.
Yeah.
So they engaged, a lobby group, a media company, to some public awareness out
there. Did you guys run ads and everything? I mean, like, was it a serious media campaign?
We're not allowed to advertise.
And so in South Australia, there was a little bit of media work, but not much. To be honest, the lobbying was so successful, ministers in sort of negotiating the legislation down to a point where the shops could still remain, open and doing good business without too many, restrictions. Obviously, not selling to under 18s was in there and that kind of thing. And online sales was going to be safe as well. But what happened is just as they were getting to the point where that legislation was going to go to a vote and go to a house, etc., the ministers involved that were in charge of those, of this new legislation, managing some other portfolios regarding mental health and things like that, and they fucked up. They had a big controversy, some mental health patients, mistreated. Fast forward, 6 months or so, and there's a new election, there's a new government elected. New government comes in, different party, different ministers. They went, oh, look at this legislation. Yeah, cool. Bang the vaping in with tobacco. And we're not interested in negotiating with anybody.
Wow.
No.
And so there, I mean, the transition time is just so fast that there was no way.
It was super quick. There was no real, as I said, no consultation with any of the businesses that were involved in the original lobbying. There are a number of people representing, vapors through Avatar, the Australian Vapors and Trade Association.
Yeah.
And they basically refused meetings with all of these industry people to try and say, hey, look, I understand you want to bring in this legislation, but do you realize what it's going to do to this industry? And they're like, we don't care.
So this election must have been just like a clean sweep then. I mean, if it's that, that seems like a chaotic kind of thing to try and transition through,
The problem was it all happened super quickly, and there was no, we're going to have like originally they did like a committee, and they investigated vaping, and they were like, what is this? Any of that.
Oh shit.
And we lost. Oh.
Yeah, lost you for a second.
So this regulation basically bans online sales.
Yeah. So the way that online sales works is in New South Wales, Victoria, and other states, you can sell cigarettes online. But in South Australia, there's a different law: no online tobacco sales whatsoever. Okay. So by putting vaping in with the tobacco legislation in South Australia, immediately online sales are dead. Even though technically, if you're in a different state, South Australia may not be able to regulate sales from another state. They'll bury any shop in litigation, 100 grand's worth of legal fees just to prove that you can sell to South Australians. No online business is going to be able to afford
it's hard enough
like that.
It's hard enough to keep your doors open as a dedicated vapor shop as it is, let alone if you're embroiled in a fucking lawsuit against the government. I mean,
even if you're right, you're not going to win it.
It doesn't fucking matter.
The bottomless pit of legal money that they have to fight you. So basically, it means that no South Australian and no Australian business will be able to sell to SA customers.
And is that
the only way a South Australian customer can order online is to order from New Zealand or the US or the UK.
Or China or one of those different retailers, I'm assuming.
Is this also, but this is also going to put brick and mortars behind the curtain, right?
Yeah. So then there's the other side of it. You've got the online sales ban, and then you've got the same restrictive laws that apply to cigarettes applied to vape shops, brick and mortars. So in South Australia, if you go to the shops to buy cigarettes, it's all behind roller doors or cabinets. You can't see the cigarettes.
Exactly.
All they have is Benson and Hedges, $29.90. Peter Stuyvesant's, $32.50. They just have the name and the price. That's all you're allowed to display.
Which doesn't matter much for cigarettes, because if you've been smoking cigarettes, you got your brand. It ain't no big fucking thing. But it's devastating to a vape shop.
You have kits on display. All the kits. Like, how do you know? Like, do I know a Cool Fire 4? Is that what I want, or do I want a fucking alien kit? Like. What,
so basically, you have to do
any of that information.
You have to do like every little bit of research online. You have to know exactly what you want to get before you go into any brick and mortar in South Australia. And if they have it, they have it. If they don't, you're fucked.
A lot of people start vaping and then they stop vaping because they quit cigarettes. There's a lot of people that don't continue to vape. If you can't get those new customers coming into your shop, that churn of a smoker that wants to quit, he quits via vaping and then he stops altogether. But there's another person that wants to quit smoking. If you don't have that continued churn, then you've lost, a lot of your business.
At this point, not a lot of hobbyist vapors are buying their shit in a shop anymore, because it's not feasible, as far as, because it costs a little more to go to a shop, and you're not going to be able to find the wire you need to make your own fucking coil.
Yeah, correct.
I think there are a lot of long-term vapors that still aren't hobbyist vapors, though, that maybe just buy 1 or 2 kits a year. They found a juice that they liked, and they just
I got
that's true.
And those
that's
are the people that continue to go to the vape shops. Usually.
Absolutely.
It's also going to affect, like, I think there's going to be a lot of people in their 50s and 60s who don't buy online at all, and who aren't near a brick. And who were near a brick and mortar store, but since the new regulations comes in, that brick and mortar shuts down. Suddenly, They haven't got a brick and mortar they can get to easily. They don't want to buy online because they're worried about their credit card details because it's 60, and that's what a lot of people, it literally, and that's what I've said, it is literally going to cost people's lives.
I don't think that. Well, I think with the FDA's recent announcement last week, I think that online sales are safe.
Yeah, so do I.
For a good amount. I think that flavors are going to be safe till 2022 as well.
So
the big thing with us is the testing that needs to happen next year, which is the toxicology testing. I forget what the HS something or other.
Yeah.
HSP. I'm sorry, I'm not an e-liquid manufacturer, so I don't know. But and the PMTAs. And
PMTAs, yeah.
There is a risk that the PMTA deadline could somehow get moved up. So.
Yeah, because they could still do that, right?
Yeah, but you would have thought, and I've heard other people say this as well, you would have thought if they were going to do that, it would have been in that announcement from last week.
That's what I thought was coming.
Well, it's something. Not having flavors in C-stores is definitely something.
That's true.
Because, there's no, for a lot of people, they don't have a vape shop nearby. Let's say you quit by using a mango jewel, right? And you live in a rural Montana.
I bought this 2 weeks ago when all the shit hit the fan with Juul, because I'd never used a Juul in my life. And I bought mango pods, and I've been using it, and it's very underwhelming. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah. The flavors just not there.
I've never owned a Juul because of the pre-nick thing here in Australia, but I've tried a few. Me Pod is my favorite cheap pod system. I like the Orion the best, and I like the Zel 2 and stuff like that. But the Me Pod's so convenient, blah, blah, blah. The Me Pod doesn't have the best flavor, but I will say this. It's got much better flavor than the
it does.
Juul.
It's too loose of a draw for me, though. Like, if I'm going to go pod system,
that's like a direct lung.
Like, I want that shit tight.
Do you put the little insert in your pod, Matt? Do you put the little insert?
Still, I don't know. I didn't vibe with it.
But I think as far as online sales and I think your flavor
going to get screwed in other ways.
Yeah, I think the genie is far too out of the bottle in the US for you guys to get screwed quite as badly as Australia could be.